He agreed to date the ugliest girl in the office, but what he saw left him shocked. The words still rang in Ethan's ears as he leaned back in his chair, staring at the text message on his phone. His best friend and coworker Liam had sent him a challenge, one that had started as a joke but had quickly spiraled into something else. "I dare you to take her out. Just one date. Come on, man. Show some kindness." Them. They all referred to her as if she weren't even a person. Margaret, or Maggie as her nameplate read, was the quiet girl in accounting. No one really spoke to her, not because she was rude or dismissive, but because she was just invisible. She dressed plainly, avoided eye contact, and had an awkward demeanor that made her an easy target for hushed office gossip. It wasn't just about her looks. Some found her posture slouched, her clothing outdated, and her presence forgettable. Ethan had never really paid attention to her before, but now, after accepting the dare, he found himself studying her from afar. And then, something happened that changed everything. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment. He could already hear the laughter that would follow if he refused. Liam and the others would call him soft, say he was too nice to play along. But it wasn't just peer pressure that made him agree, it was curiosity. Margaret, or Maggie, was a mystery. He had worked in the same office as her for almost a year, yet he knew nothing about her. She was always hunched over her desk, typing away at numbers that seemed impossible for anyone else to understand. She never joined in office gossip, never went to happy hours, never seemed to want to belong. "Fine," he typed back. "One date." Liam's response was immediate. "You're a legend. This is gonna be hilarious." Ethan frowned. Was it? The next day, he approached Maggie's desk. It felt strange standing there, as if he had stepped into another world, one where silence was louder than words. "Hey, Maggie," he said, trying to sound casual. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to acknowledge her. "Oh. Hi, Ethan." Her voice was soft, unsure, like someone who wasn't used to being spoken to. "I was wondering," he hesitated, suddenly aware of how wrong this felt. "Would you like to grab dinner sometime?" Maggie blinked. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, very slowly, she said, "Are you asking me on a date?" He nodded, ignoring the snickers from a few desks away. For a second, she looked like she might refuse. But then, to his surprise, she smiled, just slightly. "Okay." Ethan hadn't expected that. "Great," he said quickly. "Tomorrow." She nodded, then turned back to her work as if nothing had happened. As he walked away, Liam gave him a thumbs up from across the room, grinning. Ethan felt a wave of unease settle over him. This was supposed to be a joke. So why did it feel like something else? The next evening, Ethan arrived at the little Italian restaurant he had chosen. He was early, nervous, for some reason. Then the door opened, and his breath caught. Maggie stepped inside, looking different. She wasn't suddenly a supermodel. She hadn't transformed into someone else. But there was something in the way she carried herself, her back a little straighter, her eyes brighter. She was wearing a deep blue dress that, while simple, made her look elegant. And then she smiled. Ethan had never noticed her smile before. It was small, hesitant, but it changed her entire face. "Hey," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Ethan stood up, still slightly in shock. "Hey." They sat down, and to his surprise, the conversation flowed easily. Maggie wasn't just quiet, she was thoughtful. She listened before she spoke, and when she did, it was with intelligence and dry humor that caught Ethan off guard. "I know why you asked me out," she said suddenly, stirring her pasta. Ethan froze. "You do." She gave a small shrug. "Office gossip isn't as quiet as people think." He felt a wave of shame. "Maggie, It's okay," she interrupted. "I almost said no. But then I thought, why not?" He frowned. "Why not?" She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Because I knew you'd be the one surprised." And Ethan was. Because for the first time, he saw her, not as the ugliest girl in the office, not as the quiet accountant, but as Maggie. And that realization shook him more than anything else. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. The date had started as a joke, a ridiculous dare meant to amuse his friends, but now he sat across from Maggie, feeling something unexpected: guilt. She knew. She knew about the bet, the teasing whispers, the way people looked at her. And yet, she had agreed to go out with him anyway. Why? Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was defiance. Or maybe, just maybe, Maggie wasn't as fragile as people assumed. As their dinner continued, Ethan found himself listening more than talking. Maggie had a sharp mind, her dry humor weaving effortlessly into their conversation. She spoke of books he had never read, places she wanted to travel, the kind of deep thoughts that most people in the office never shared. "So why do you keep to yourself at work?" he asked, genuinely curious. Maggie tilted her head, considering. "Because people judge before they understand." Her words struck him harder than he expected. And then, she smirked. "And I like watching them make fools of themselves." Ethan laughed, startled. He hadn't expected that. When the date ended, he walked her to her car. The air between them was different now. No longer awkward, but something else, something unspoken. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, meeting his eyes. "For tonight." The way she said it made his chest tighten. He had gone into this expecting nothing, but now he felt like he had been given a glimpse into something rare. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." As he watched her drive away, he realized the strangest thing of all. He wanted to see her again. And that terrified him. Monday morning came too quickly. Ethan entered the office, expecting to slip back into his usual routine. But the moment he walked in, Liam was already waiting at his desk, grinning like an idiot. "Well," Liam nudged him. "How was it? Did you survive?" Ethan felt an unexpected surge of anger. He had agreed to this bet, but suddenly, it felt wrong. Maggie wasn't some joke. "It was fine," he said shortly, turning on his computer. Liam snickered. "Did she talk about spreadsheets all night?" Ethan shot him a look. "Actually, she's really smart. And funny." Liam's grin faltered. "Wait, are you serious?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, his eyes flickered across the office to where Maggie sat, typing away at her desk as if nothing had changed. But when she glanced up and met his gaze, something passed between them. A secret understanding. Ethan looked away, his heart pounding. This was not what he had expected. And he wasn't sure what to do about it. The days that followed were strange for Ethan. He had expected the date with Maggie to be nothing more than a forgettable night, a simple checkmark on a stupid dare. But instead, it had planted something inside him, something he couldn't quite shake. He found himself glancing in her direction more often, noticing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought. How she sometimes smiled to herself while typing, lost in a world no one else could see. And worst of all, he found himself wanting to talk to her again. But he wasn't sure how. Because if he did, people would notice. And that's exactly what happened. It started small, just a few raised eyebrows when Ethan exchanged an offhand good morning with Maggie by the coffee machine. Then there were the hushed voices whenever he walked past. Wait, is he actually talking to her? Maybe he lost a bet, again. Do you think she thinks he actually likes her? Ethan hated it. He hated that people still thought of her that way. And he hated himself for ever being one of them. He tried to ignore it. But when he saw Maggie heading toward the break room, he followed her without thinking. She was pouring herself a cup of tea when he stepped in. She didn't look up, but she knew he was there. "You don't have to do this, you know." Ethan frowned. "Do what?" She finally turned, her expression unreadable. "Pretend." The word stung. "I'm not pretending." Maggie studied him carefully. "You weren't supposed to like me, Ethan." Something in his chest tightened. "Who said I do?" She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You're not as good at lying as you think." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, anything, but before he could, the door swung open. Liam. The smug grin on his face made Ethan's stomach twist. "Oh wow," Liam chuckled. "This is still going on?" Maggie didn't flinch. Ethan did. Before he could react, Maggie turned to Liam with a cool, unreadable expression. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Ethan was just leaving." Ethan's heart dropped. And without another word, she walked past him, out of the break room, out of the moment, leaving him standing there, feeling something he never expected. Regret. It started small, just a few raised eyebrows when Ethan exchanged an offhand good morning with Maggie by the coffee machine. Then there were the hushed voices whenever he walked past. Wait, is he actually talking to her? Maybe he lost a bet again. Do you think she thinks he actually likes her? Ethan hated it. He hated that people still thought of her that way. And he hated himself for ever being one of them. He tried to ignore it. But when he saw Maggie heading toward the break room, he followed her without thinking. She was pouring herself a cup of tea when he stepped in. She didn't look up, but she knew he was there. "You don't have to do this, you know." Ethan frowned. "Do what?" She finally turned, her expression unreadable. "Pretend." The word stung. "I'm not pretending." Maggie studied him carefully. "You weren't supposed to like me, Ethan." Something in his chest tightened. "Who said I do?" She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You're not as good at lying as you think." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, anything, but before he could, the door swung open. Liam. The smug grin on his face made Ethan's stomach twist. "Oh wow," Liam chuckled. "This is still going on?" Maggie didn't flinch. Ethan did. Before he could react, Maggie turned to Liam with a cool, unreadable expression. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Ethan was just leaving." Ethan's heart dropped. And without another word, she walked past him, out of the break room, out of the moment, leaving him standing there, feeling something he never expected. Regret. That night, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. Maggie's words replayed in his mind. "You weren't supposed to like me." She had expected him to be like everyone else. And maybe she was right. But he wasn't anymore. Because somehow, without meaning to, without realizing when or how, he had started to like her. Really like her. And he had no idea what to do about it. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of regret that clung to him like a shadow. Maggie had walked away from him, not just in the break room, but in a way that felt final, like she had already decided how their story would end. And for the first time, Ethan didn't want to accept that. The next morning, he did something unexpected. He walked past Liam's desk without stopping, without engaging in the usual jokes or office banter. Instead, he went straight to Maggie's desk. She barely looked up when he arrived. "Hey," he said softly. She continued typing. "What do you want, Ethan?" He hesitated, but then sighed. "To talk." Maggie finally glanced up, but her face was unreadable. "Why?" He took a deep breath. "Because I was an idiot." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she said nothing. "I asked you out for the wrong reasons," he admitted. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about that. Maggie stared at him for a long moment before leaning back in her chair. "And what is it about now?" Ethan hesitated. He could feel the weight of the office's gaze on them. He knew that if he said the wrong thing, she would shut him out forever. But for once, he didn't care what anyone thought. So he told her the truth. "It's about you," he said. "Because I see you now, Maggie. And I don't want to stop." Her lips parted slightly in surprise. For the first time, Ethan saw something else in her eyes. Not hesitation, not doubt, but hope. And that's when he knew. It had never been a joke. It had always been her. Ethan and Maggie didn't become a fairy tale couple overnight. It took time. Trust. Maggie was hesitant at first, wary of his change of heart, afraid that it was temporary. But Ethan showed her, again and again, that he wasn't leaving. The office didn't understand it at first. The whispers continued, but Ethan stopped hearing them. Because when he was with Maggie, the noise didn't matter. She was brilliant, witty, and kind. And the more he got to know her, the more he realized how blind he had been before. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench, Ethan took her hand in his. "You know," he said, squeezing her fingers gently, "I think you're the most beautiful person I've ever met." Maggie chuckled. "You don't have to say that. I mean it." He turned to face her. "And I don't care if it took me too long to realize it." She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to find any trace of dishonesty in his face. But she found none. So, finally, she smiled. And this time Ethan knew, without a doubt, that he had fallen in love with her. For real. And he had never been happier.